Overrides are general properties that can be used in all areas of XSI, so for animation or modeling purposes, but are probably most useful in the rendering area, and in particular in the context of passes and partitions. What overrides are general properties that can be applied to any object or group. So really quickly, I'm going to apply an override to the background object partition. So get property override. Now we've installed a blank override on the background object partition. And it's within the override PPG that we can add parameters that we want to control. So what I'm going to do is selectively choose parameters that I want to control through the override for that group. That might seem a little confusing, but we'll go through a simple example to show how this works. So for example, say for this partition that I've applied the override to, we want to hide the objects for view visibility. So what we want to do is first mark that parameter. So we click Add Parameter. This opens up a Transient Explorer where I can select the parameters that I want to mark within the override. So we've got a flat list of the objects. We just need to scope down and find the parameter we want to mark. So I know under the visibility property, I can find the view visibility option. So I mark it, click outside the Transient Explorer to end the session. And now we can see that entry got immediately added to the override. So if I turn that off, you can see now it's controlling the view visibility for all those objects in that partition. And because the override was applied at the partition level, it's only active for that pass. So we've switched to a new pass. We can see the override is deactivated and we're back to our default pass. So we switch back. And this is something to remember for performance reasons, is the overrides are installed and deinstalled based on whether they're active. So if you're on a scene, if you're on a partition or a pass, that has an override, and you save the scene, what actually happens is the override gets deinstalled, the scene is saved, and then the override gets reinstalled. So something that you want to keep in mind when you're working with large scenes is always save your scene on a pass that doesn't contain any overrides. For a simple scene like this, it doesn't make a big difference, but with thousands of objects, the override actually has to disconnect from each object and then reconnect at the end of the save. So it can add up to a few minutes. So that's something to really keep in mind. We've got a few new functionalities in for 4.0 with overrides, which I think people will be quite happy with. We can now scope down and you can actually see the entries you've got in the override. So we can mark the entry by selecting it and actually remove the marked parameter from the override PPG. So it's been removed. The PPG doesn't refresh immediately. We'll reopen it. We can see the entry's been deleted. Also, overrides now support animation. So that's great news because what we can do is now overwrite animated parameters. So say in the past you'd animate the visibility of your objects locally and then you want to control them through a partition. It wasn't possible because the override did not store F-curve data or animation. So the local animation on the object's view visibility would overwrite the override settings. So now we can actually key the visibility over time through the override and have that work. So that's good news too. We're going to be looking at overrides a lot more in depth when we look at the production examples for passes.